welcome to my channel. My name is Linda. I have a couple of fun crafts for you today. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. For today's projects, we'll be working on some Americana style crafts that make you go boom. Let's get started with project number 1. For this project, I'm going to be using, and the next one, some gift boxes from Dollar Tree. Now, this is like the medium size. I've got some fabric here. These are like thrifted shorts. Yeah, shorts that you wear, and this is some muslin material. And then I wasn't sure on these. I picked out some different spindles and large dowel. I think I'm going to use these 3 and I'll cut them down to fit. You could use all the same, whatever you want to use. So I've taken the bottom off of my box and I ripped some of the paper off and stuff because I wasn't sure what was going to show through or not. And now on the bottom of the box, I'm tracing it onto those jean materials and I'll cut that out. And you can use whatever materials you want. If you don't want to use material and you want to use paper, you can do that too. All right, so here it is all cut out. And then what I'm doing now is I'm cutting a larger piece of material here. Okay, and it's about 1 inch bigger than the bottom of the cardboard there. And then I'm going to cut slits all the way around. So 2 circles, one that fits the cardboard and one that's about 1 inch bigger in diameter all the way around. Because what I'm going to do is take some multi-purpose spray adhesive here. Of course, you could use glue or hot glue. I'm going to spray it and I'm going to put the bigger circle on first. All right, and then I'm going to add some glue onto that excess material around the outside and I'm going to pull those in. Okay, we're just covering the bottom of the box, of course. All right, and then I'm going to use my spray adhesive again. And then the smaller circle we'll put in the middle to make it all look pretty, just like that. Now, there's a reason I did this in case someone looks inside the box, right? Now what I'm doing, this is a leg of the shorts, and I'm cutting down one of the seams. And then I'm seeing how much, just kind of top and bottom of fabric I'm going to need, hoping I have about 2 inches left. And I do, it looks like. So I'm going to cut off the strip that goes around the box, which is what I have here. I did it off camera, and then my little 2-inch strip. And then again, I'm going to use my spray adhesive, and I'm going to wrap the outer side of the box with the larger piece of the shorts. It sounds funny when I say shorts, but that's what I'm using. They're thrifted shorts. I like them because of their, stripe there. Wrap that around, and I'm going to pull it nice and tight. Don't want any wrinkles or anything like that. I'll cut off any excess I have. I'll leave a little bit of excess, but I don't need, 3 inches of excess. And then, of course, I'll glue that probably about 1 inch. Once I cut off the little bit there, I'll glue that to it so it's nice. And then I'm going to add glue here on the inside, and then I'm going to fold that in. Now, this one, for some reason, the end that's like the hemmed edge of the shorts, it fits perfectly. But then the other side, I think it's because the material does get a little bit wider. I have to cut a few slits in it. The other side, I didn't have to. I have to cut a few slits. And then, of course, I'll use my Fabri-Tac glue and fold that inward. But yeah, I think because, the shorts leg, right, as you're wearing shorts, it's narrower, the hem edge, and then goes up. So that's probably why I had to put slits on this side. And then, of course, I don't want to leave the center, but here's what that looks like. Now, you could, but I'm going to go ahead and just cover that whole inside with that little 2-inch strip I had left over. Again, you don't have to go through this whole thing. You might just want to cover the outside and call it good, but I want this to look nice inside and out. It's not everything's going to be glued inside of the box. So if you want to use it for something different or you just want to showcase the box, I don't know. I just wanted to give options. So I'm really covering the inside and outside really well. And now what I'm doing is just adding some thin glue along that top edge so that we can put that covered bottom back into place. There we go, looking nice. And I'm making sure the bottom stripes are, lined up with the stripes on as best I can, as the side of the box. Now, here's my spindle pieces I decided to use. I have cut them down and sanded them. And I'm going to use Dixie Belle chalk paint in Rusty Nail, Dusty Blue, and Drop Cloth for this project. And I want to drill some holes in the top of my spindle pieces. So this square piece is actually, you know, sometimes when you get spindles, they have that one long square whatever. So that's what I cut off. And then the other two pieces are just edges of spindles or whatever. And of course, I'm going to paint one of my... This one was like round and it had like a little raised edge at one end. I actually turned that one around because you can see I drilled a hole in the one end, but when I turn it around, you're going to see later that the hole is now in the end with the raised edge around it. Does that make sense? Anyway, I do that off camera. So I'm painting each one of them, obviously red, white, and blue, going with these kind of Americana style colors. Once that's all dry, I'm going to go ahead and sandpaper and distress these up a little bit, just to make them a little bit more, you know, distressed, rustic, Americana, whatever. I'll cut a lot of the sanding out. It's not fun to watch, but I leave it in there because it's fun to watch. All right, I'm okay. All right, now I'm taking, this is just some rope you can get at Walmart in their sewing section. I like the diameter of it, so I'm just kind of making a knot first and then cutting off what I need. And I'm trying to avoid the bends in the rope where it's wrapped around that card. So you'll see me knot it in different places and whatnot. But anyway, there it is. So I'm going to add some glue down in the hole, and I've kind of glued that end up of the rope so it's nice and tight, and twisted it so that I can twist it into the drilled hole, if that makes sense. So I added glue to the rope ahead of time so that I could twist it nicely into the drilled hole of each of the firecrackers. Now you could leave these as they are. I'll shorten the little, you know, rope a little bit later. But what I want to do, of course, you know, I'm going to add a little more to it. So I'm using these stars from craftingwithkimber.com. I'll have a link down below for you, and Waverly Antique Wax mixed with water to stain them first because the wood's a little light. Then I'm painting them with the drop cloth, and then I'll distress them off camera, I believe, yes. And then here's what they look like. See, that's why I like the stain there, because it looks cool. And then I have these 3 pieces of paper. We're going to go into something a little different. I wanted to show you this. I'll have links in my description box. This is a paper pack by PhotoPlay. I'll have 2 different links because one of the links, they are low in stock. But this is called the With Liberty collection, and it comes with double-sided papers. It runs about $15, so you get 2 of each. This is the first one. This is the second one where you get all these different tags and everything that you can cut out. You can see I already cut one. And then the back side, this is another one with more tags. I love this one. It's like my favorite. But you have all these different ones you can cut apart or use the back side if you want plain paper. Here's that beautiful paper up front. I love how my favorite has music on it, and it's got vintage pieces to it. Just beautiful. And then the back side's just a red and blue plaid. I love this one that you can cut apart. It's actually got the music to it, stripes, the Pledge of Allegiance, or just plain on the back side. And then the last sheet of paper in the collection are these beautifully distressed stars. They have words and stuff in them. And then the opposite side is the stripes. That's my favorite. And then they have one last sheet of stickers. I'm not big on stickers, but you can put them on cardboard and make them stiff and use them like tags. So it works perfectly. Now these little tags I cut out of the collection. Let me show you here. So all the papers have like a manufacturer strip at the bottom, and you can see there that little red stripe. Usually on one side, it'll show you a little stripe of the preview of the paper that's on the other side, as you can see here. That's what I cut out. So you can use those little strips here. And then this, of course, is just from one of the actual papers here that I cut that tag out. Okay, now I have a free printable for you. Let's move ahead. I made 3 different sizes if you look to the upper left, and I just, you know, made them in Canva, and so you can print them out onto fabric. I've printed it out onto muslin. I'll have a link in the description box how to print out onto fabric. If you want to just print it onto paper, you can. You have either option. I, of course, like I said, print it onto fabric, and then I'm just going to rip my fabric to the size I need right close to the design. Okay, so we've got that there. Here it is ready to go. I sewed around it a little bit there off camera with my sewing machine, and I sewed around the little tags too. You can see it more on the white tags versus the darker tags, but you know, I did it there as well. And then I'm going to use some of this ribbon here because it looks from Hobby Lobby. It's all like fringed on the edge and it matches the way my tag ripped. All right, and then some of this star ribbon, also from Hobby Lobby. Get it half off, like that star ribbon would be $1. Can't beat that, and there's a lot on it. And then what I'm going to do is I sewed around the one ribbon, and then I sewed the star ribbon through the center. And now I'm going to take some of this Distress Oxide ink, Vintage Photo, and I'm just going to ink around the tag. I almost wish I picked another color on the tag because it made it look a little bit more yellowy than I wanted, because Vintage Photo has a little bit of a yellowish green tinge to it, but that's okay. And then I'm using the edge of my scissor blades to scrape along my paper pieces so it kind of gives them a little roughened, rustic look. And here I'll ink up this ribbon ensemble, so to speak. It looks better on here than on the fireworks because the firework kind of already had a little bit of that hue to it. Anyway, I went with it, not a big deal. Now I'm using my Fabri-Tac glue and I'm gluing this onto the outside of our container. Right, and then I added some batting on the back of the tag. You can add a little batting or cotton. I just wanted it to stick up a little more. I didn't want it so flat against the box. Now you could use a piece of like felt under it or something like that. But see how it kind of is up a little bit, sort of? I don't know. Your choice. And now I'm going to add the papers to our firecrackers. I'm just kind of see where I want it to go as opposed to where the stars are going to lay. And then on a couple of the back of the stars, on one of them, I put some extra wood there so it'll lift the star up because it's going to sit up against that raised area on the red firecracker. And on this one, I'm adding a tiny clothespin. And then I'll add some wood pieces on the back here. You'll actually see a little extra heart because I grabbed a heart. It was the right size. I want those wood pieces to be raised up to the exact level of the clothespin so that it lays flat. All right? So this one will go glue right up under the lip of that firecracker, see, and then it'll lay flat, and then we'll glue this one on. It'll lay flat. Then I'm going to go ahead and glue a couple of buttons down, one on each of the stars that don't have anything because one had the teeny tiny clothespin, so these need teeny tiny stars. Teeny enough, I have to use some tweezers to get those on there. I'm going to add some crinkle paper here to take up the space, and we'll add some moss to it later. Now I want to bring in that teeny clothespin, so I'm going to add a bigger one, and then I took some twine and made a bow, and I'm going to make that clothespin, appear as if it's holding the bow, even though I glued it on to the outside of the box. Now I'm going to add some moss here. I always do crinkle paper underneath the moss so I don't have to use as much moss, right? Takes up the space and then you only have to use a little bit of moss. Now I'm taking the edge of my scissor blades. I've shortened the wicks, even though I'm going to shorten a little bit more, and I'm smooshing them out with my scissor blades. Then I'm taking some black paint mixed with water and I'm adding some splatters onto the firecrackers. I'll also splatter the tag a little bit, and also off camera, I did glue the tails of that twine bow to the side so they don't just fall in the middle of that label. We'll set our firecrackers into their container. That makes these ready to go boom! And this project is complete. We'll take a look at the results at the end of the video. I had to make it go with the title. Aha, now you get it. I'm still cracking myself up. Boom. Project number 2. Let's get started. I'm going to use another one of these medium-sized gift boxes from Dollar Tree. I am going to use this lid. I'll use it in a little bit, but I have the lid from the other box that I didn't need, and I peeled the paper and stuff off. And I took it apart, again, because I wasn't sure, what's going to show through or not. So I peeled some of the paper off. And of course, you'll see why I detached that lid in a little bit. Now I'm going to bring in some craft sticks. I went with the big ones because I like the width of them. You could use the smaller ones. And I'm just cutting them to the height of the outside of the box. And with these giant ones and the medium gift box, I was able to just get 3 slats, quote unquote, per stick. And I only end up needing 14. All right, I'm going to have to put some space in between the slats. And because I'm going to have to do that, I am going to take this Dixie Belle chalk paint in the color Coffee Bean. It's kind of a nice dark brown black, and paint the outside of the box a little bit. And I'm just going to have to be really careful with it because since the outside of that box is like slickery, this paint will scratch off really easy. But I wasn't able to squeeze the slats close together because it wasn't enough space for another slat, so I had to separate them, so I need to cover the outside of the box a little bit. Understandable? Now I'm taking antique wax mixed with water. I'm taking Dixie Belle chalk paint in the color Rusty Nail and drop cloth. And again, since my slats, the wood is really light, I'm going to use the Waverly wax as a stain. I'm just painting the front and the sides. And then, of course, I will take the Rusty Nail and the drop cloth. I will divide the sticks in half, and some will be red, and of course some will be white. Now technically I really didn't need to paint the whole front of the slat. I just needed to paint through the center because the top and bottom part of the slat will get covered up, but you know, I want to just make sure it's covered. So just the front and the sides. Then once the paint's dry, off camera, here's an arrow. I distressed both of my red and white pieces. Now what we essentially want to do is, here's the lid I took apart, right? This is the outer of the lid. I want my slats to fit up underneath it, but it's going to be too tight. So we're going to cut it. And then I'm bringing in the lid from this box, because this lid we're using now that we just cut is from the last project. I'm going to just cut a big chunk off here. We're not going to need that much, but that's going to fill in the space that we are going to need to be able to get our slats up underneath it. Now you could just use just a regular piece of cardboard there if you want, because you only need about 1 inch on this medium box. I'm going to bring in this ribbon from Hobby Lobby. Now you don't have to put a rim around it at all. If you want, you could just cover it with ribbon, but I wanted to use this outer portion of the lid because it just gives it some thickness there, but you could totally not even use that and just cover it with ribbon. All right, so now it's time to get our slats on. I started out real closely at first, as you can kind of see here, but then I end up moving them probably about a 1/16 inch apart. Maybe it's a 1/16 now, and I end up moving them about an 1/8. I think about an 1/8 inch apart. And I'm going to finish this all the way around, alternating the colors. And here it is done, about an 1/8 inch apart. Now you know why we did the coffee bean, because you can see it. And now we're going to get, if you want to use this, if you want to just use ribbon, you can go ahead and glue your ribbon along that outer edge. But here's my little piece, 1 inch cardboard to take up that space. And we're going to get this glued on at the bottom of the box. And then I still will cover it with that ribbon, but like I said, I wanted that thickness to be there. All right, got that glued. Now I'm going to add in our little 1 inch square here. All right, and I'm cutting my ribbon to the size I need. And off camera, I'm going to sew top and bottom of that ribbon. You can just glue it on if you don't want to sew it. And I want to show you something else here. This is the original lid on the box, but do you see that space from the lid to the outer core of the edge of that box? If you're doing it like I'm doing, don't just trace the lid. Make sure that you trace the whole outer edge of that box, okay? And this is what that looks like, all right? And then I, of course, cut some of that muslin fabric out and I sewed around the edge. And then here's my ribbon sewed top and bottom. Again, you don't have to do any of that, but I just want to show you now I'm putting my lid on. See, if we'd only trace the lid and then put fabric on there, it wouldn't cover to the end of the box, because I accidentally did that, so trust me. So you want to make sure you trace the whole outer side of the box, not just the lid, if you're going to use the lid. And now, of course, we're gluing our trim on here, and that will cover all that roughness up. Then once that's complete, the whole bottom half of our box is beautiful. So now we need to deal with the top. I want to make a cover that's going to go up over the top and around the edge. So that piece that we just cut for the bottom, I cut another circle 1 inch larger all the way around. So I'm cutting that out in that muslin material because we want it to look like the top of an old drum where they wrap it with fabric and rope it around the top. So that's why we want this a little bit bigger. All right, I'm going to put that aside and we're going to move to our drumsticks. Now, this is the material I chose, but it wasn't quite the right shade I wanted. So I have tea bags here and some water, and off camera, I just put tea bags in warm water. I dunked some fabric in there, just dunked it in and wrung it out. And now I'm waiting for it to dry, but now you can see the difference of the color. And then I'm going to do 5 inch diameter circles here. All right, once it's dry, I ironed it out, and now I'm going to cut 2 5 inch diameter circles out of this fabric. You might have to go a little bit bigger or smaller depending on what you use for the end of your drumstick. I want to go over the circles again really quick. This first one is 7 3/4. That wraps over the top. This is 6 inches that goes on the bottom. And then, of course, the 5 inch circles for the end of the drumsticks, okay? And you might have to adjust that depending on what you use. Now, what I want to do, I started out by putting stuffing in this box, but it was too lumpy, so I'm using the leftover part of the lid of this box and gluing it on top. But it's really dark brown, and my fabric down below, there's the arrow. You can see the cutting board beneath it. It's too thin. So I'm just adding a secondary piece of fabric here on top. Then I'll flip the box over, add some glue, flip it over, and then, you know, so I can center it and add that larger piece of fabric on top. 2 pieces of fabric because you could see through the main one. And then here that is, just making sure it's nice and smooth. Now let's go to work on the drumsticks. I had these. You can get them from Hobby Lobby, like an end cap, but they're too small. And all I could find was these in my stash, or these little decorative balls you can get at Dollar Tree. So I'm going to use those, but like a styrofoam ball or a pre-made pom-pom, you could just take a lump of, cotton and put on the end, but these are going to work fine. They were readily available. And then I'm just going to add some glue around the outside since they're all lumpy bumpy and just cover them with some cotton. Whatever works for you. All right. And I would have just covered them with cotton, but I thought it might be too soft. I wanted something kind of hard. So that's why I chose these and then cover them with cotton. Once you're all done with whatever you're going to use for the end of your drumstick, you could set it in the middle of your circle. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, I took that circle to the sewing machine and I sewed around the edge so it matched all the other sewing. Anyway, put this in the middle of your fabric circle and then just fold it downward, and it will give you essentially like a look of folds, but I want mine a little bit more gathered, right? So I'm going to take my sewing machine about 1 inch in, longest stitch length. I'm going to leave a space between where I started and where I stopped. You can see right here, I'll put an arrow, boom, there's a little space there. You can do this by hand as well with a needle and thread. I will leave a link in my blog. It says Basic Sewing Stitches that shows you how to do that with hand stitching. All right, and then I pull on these long threads. You'll do the same with hand stitching. You'll leave long threads and you'll pull on a long thread, and it'll essentially give you this gathered look like we've got a little house on the prairie bonnet. And then I'll add some glue to both pieces, and I'll set my stick inside of our little bonnet, pull it down. I'll pull on those long threads still. We still need them, and pull it nice and tight so it gathers it up. And then I'll tie a couple of little knots with those threads hanging down and then cut the excess off. And then we want to cover that up a little bit and make it a little tighter. So I'll wrap some twine around the edge about 7 or 8 times. I'm going to make sure I have it just like the other one that's done. It's perfect. So I'm going to cut off the excess. Then we'll get that glued into place. And then once we're done, we've got 2 drumsticks that look fabulous. And of course, whether or not you folded the material down or gathered it, you'll do the same thing with the twine on both of them, and then adjust your sticks if you need to. So I'm doing that there. And then we're going to move back to the drum. So what I'm doing is just adding a few spots of glue all the way around, and I'm taking that same twine I used on the drumsticks, and I'm going to wrap it right up underneath the top area there. And I'm going to wrap it around a couple of times, just right up near the top. Make a couple of wraps, just like that, and then glue it. Perfect. And then I'm going to fluff out the end there so it kind of, gives us that gathered fluffy look out. Fluff out the end underneath that twine there. So it looks like a top-covered drum. This is what we've got. All right, and then, of course, I'm going to do it. Black paint mixed with water, and I'm going to splatter all around my drum. I just think it gives it a little bit more dimension. And then, of course, I'll splatter on top a little bit. And I'm not going to leave out the drumsticks, so I'm going to stick those into some craft foam so that I can splatter the tops of those. All right, now we want to make our little string thing along the side, right? So you can do it like I'm going to go red to red, like up and down in like a zigzag. Or you could put it farther apart like this. You choose how you want to do it. And I just used some thumbtacks, but they were too silver. So I did just a tiny swish swish of black spray paint. So you still see a little silver, but the black kind of tones it down a little bit. Okay, and then we'll just start going around with our zigzag on the outside of our drum. Again, you can make it as narrow or as wide as you want. I'll glue the twine in place first so it gets tacky, and then I'll push the thumbtack in. I can't get the thumbtacks in all the way at first. I get them in just enough because it's actually kind of hard to press into that wood. But then off camera, I go later and, use like a pair of pliers or something to help me push it in. But I'll just continue this process all the way around until I get it where I want it to be. There's a little bit of it so far. I'll show you that and then finish the rest off camera. All right, there we go. Looking good. All right, and then when I come down to the last part, I'm taking some tweezers so I can get right up under that first thumbtack and then wrap that sucker in and hide the end of that twine. And then once that's done, I'm looking for something to lay on top of my drumsticks. I thought of the Crafting with Kimber star or a button, and in the end result, I go with the button. I'm going to use Michael's Clickable Stamps. I'm going to spell out the word freedom, and I'm going to just rip a couple of pieces of muslin fabric here to make a little tag. I'll put a little piece of batting in between. I'm going to use Versafine ink in black. I'm going to stamp freedom. So I've got 2 pieces of fabric, piece of batting. If you're a gluer, you can glue those together. I will sew mine off camera and make us a little tag here. That's what that looks like. And then I'm going to take my Distress Oxide ink and Vintage Photo again. I'm going to ink around the tag, kind of give it a little halo around our word. And then I'm going to ink around the top of the drum, give it a little bit of, 3D look, a little bit of definition, like we're shading everything, right, of course. Like if you're painting and you want to shade around the edges, make things pop up. I'll do it on the white of and the red, I guess, a little bit of the wood, and then along the bottom, the tops of our drumsticks. And once that's done, I'm just taking a little piece of twine and I'm threading through the center of my button. I like my holes filled up. And then I'm going to glue my drumsticks together, kind of crisscross. And then once that sets up a little bit, I'm going to take some twine and then just to add a little bit more further strength so those don't come apart and then they match the twine at the top, I'm going to wrap several times around the center. Then once that's done, we'll glue our sticks on top of our drums. I'll go ahead and add a little glue right up near the top of the things as well, as you can see here, just to make sure we've got them nice and stable. Then I'm going to bring in a twine bow, glue that down. Going to glue our tag down, going to glue our button down. That makes our drums ready to go. Boom! And that makes this project complete. So I hope you enjoyed both of our projects that make your July 4th want to go boom. Drums go boom and firecrackers go boom. Come on, people. Trying to make this fun for you. Anyway, leave me a comment down below and let me know which project was your favorite. With that said, this does finish up our season of July 4th projects. Please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps my channel to grow. And if you walked in here for the first time, you're just checking things out, you're digging what you saw, make sure before you click off, you hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss out on another project from me. And the next projects we'll be starting into, again, just as a reminder, Christmas in July all month long. Woohoo! Now, before I go, I'm going to leave you with one final thought. We don't often make the right decisions when trying to figure out our next move. Think of it like a single player in a game against the computer, without reading the playbook or at least scanning the rules. We would try to gain access to all the facts with our own deductive reasoning while we calculate our next move in the game. The computer, on the other hand, is developed to anticipate our every move by using its algorithms to examine our responses while evaluating and assessing each of our steps so that it can reach its own conclusion of winning the game. Kind of sounds a lot like the enemy, doesn't it? Unfortunately, the enemy has seen the playbook, and he's predicted our next move by determining what our weaknesses are, and he tweaks the rules just enough so that we might concede our next move and he wins. But here's the good news. At some point, the enemy will make a completely random move against his own algorithm because he thinks he has us all figured out. He thinks he has the game won, but we have a secret weapon. A hidden advantage. We have this verse in the Bible, the book of James, chapter 1, verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom to guide him through a decision or circumstance, he is to ask of our benevolent God, who gives to everyone generously and without rebuke or blame, and it will be given to him. The enemy's algorithm will always lack this one piece of missing code. We have the champion on our side. We have the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth, the book of Revelations, chapter 1, verse 5. We have the King of Kings to help us through this complex game called life. We just need to ask him to reveal our next move. He is the perfect one to consult with us on the rules of the game because he wrote the playbook. He never deceives, he never lies, and his abilities will always be represented with truth and honesty. You see, every day we are given the choice in how we choose to position ourselves with the moves we make, and each move can affect our purpose in life. But if we yield to all that God has for us, if we ask for wisdom, just like it says in James 1:5, we ask for guidance and we ask for help, his strategic positioning, his perfect timing, and his well thought out plan will get us where we need to be in order to make that game-winning move. The best part is that no matter how many times the enemy tries to anticipate our single-player game, he will never be able to match the epic strength of God, who cannot and will not ever be outplayed or outmaneuvered because he's persistent, resilient, and always successful against the trickery of the enemy. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. I thank you for sharing your time with me, and I'll talk with you again soon. Bye.